Amen. When my father was away, we could always count on her being there. And we always knew that he was going to be there. That maybe he wasn't present in the home all the time, but his presence was so strong it could be felt. When Jesus called God Father, Abba, Daddy, the religious establishment just went bonkers when they heard that. How dare him be so bold to use such an endearing term? He's raising himself to a level that he has no right to. He cannot do that. He's making himself equal with God, and he's just an itinerant rabbi from this little mud hut village up here called Nazareth. And they hated him. They decided he had to be destroyed. The problem with the Sadducees and the Pharisees of their day, the two major religious groups, they had God too far up and too high up and too far away. And that's part of the problem that we have in our own society. Fathers need to know that God is as near as they can reach him with their lips, with their mouth, with their tongue. We need to feel that we're always in the presence of God. I want that kind of an intimate relationship with God that Jesus had. And Paul told me that I could have it, because he told me, you are a child of the King. You have been adopted into the family by the blood of Jesus Christ. And one of the saddest things I think in our society and perhaps in the world is the fact that the term father and daddy has such negative connotations for so many children. Because they have a father who is abusive. They have a father who is not there. They have a father who just doesn't seem to care, who does not set an example. And many children have died at the hands of their father. You know the stories. You've seen them in our public media across the nation. The saddest thing that I just for me is that a parent, a father, or even a mother, but a father who could abuse a small, innocent child that depends on him for its life, its safety, its care. And you know what I'm talking about. We wring our hands and we cry out, why? And we become so disgusted sometimes, and we become so angry that whatever level of punishment that the court system seems to deems necessary for this individual, it just doesn't seem to be enough for us. I was going to talk a little bit about the history. Well, it started about for this day that we call Father's Day. It has a kind of a rambling kind of beginning on July the 5th of 1908. As I said before, in West Virginia, a church was having a memorial service for men who'd been killed in a mine. And that was one of the days that they'd been killed in a December explosion about the previous year in a Fairmont coal mine. And I'm sure that some of you folks from West Virginia are aware of that history. And in 1910, a lady out in Spokane, Washington. Her name was Sonora Dodd. She was sitting there listening to a preacher preach about Mother's Day, and her mother died very early in her life. Her father was left to raise her, and she thought, what a great thing to have a day, a special day to honor fathers. That was in 1910. Well, she worked very hard to make sure that that was going to happen. And since he was born in June, she got a day in June, the third Sunday in June, to celebrate Father's Day. In 1916, Woodrow Wilson, using technology, by the way, the kind of technology in a way that you and I use, by electronic signals, he unfurled a flag out in Spokane, Washington on Father's Day. And in 1924, Calvin Coolidge did his best to encourage governments to set aside a day for fathers, but it didn't seem to matter very much to governments at that time. And it wasn't until 1966 that Lyndon Johnson signed the proclamation setting aside the third Sunday in June that we would honor fathers. Now, I am one to believe that every household, if there's going to be a family, should have a male role model in that household. Our court system has decided that that's not necessary any longer. But the church says, not so. We believe that there should always be a role model in what is called the family unit, where there are children involved. There's not one of us who don't have fond memories of that person we call father or daddy, regardless of whether or not he was our biological father or not. He was that significant other in our life that helped us to be and become the person that we are today. I was thinking about this title. I asked myself, so what's God's pattern for fatherhood? And I don't have time, as I've said before, to scratch the surface of this subject. The Bible tells us that we are, as I said, children of God. Paul said to the Romans, the Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. Now that's more than just being created by God, I think. For me, that has a connotation that is much deeper than just being created by God and just being turned loose to let go and be all that I can be or whatever I choose to be. I think God has something to say about the kind of person I'm going to be in life, even as a father, even as a citizen of the community in which I live, even as a citizen of the country in which I live. It's generally held that children take on the character of their fathers. What do you do when you look in the mirror, men? Maybe you women as well. What do you see? Do you look for some character in your face, some genetic character that reminds you of your mother or your father? I do all the time. It's not a narcissistic thing. Don't misunderstand me. And I see it more in some of my siblings than I do in myself. I see it more in my sister. I see it more in my baby brother. I was thinking this morning about, I did a few years ago, I did a wedding for my great niece, and we did it in his home church in Kingsport. And I was standing there on the podium waiting for everybody to get in place. And I saw my baby brother walking down one of the aisles, sauntering kind of down the aisle to where he was going to sit. And I could see my father in the way he walked so very clearly. I never will forget, I went to visit my father's church many years ago. Me and my brother, I went home and I says, you know, I want to go to this church. I want to go to Rings Chapel Baptist Church. I haven't been there in many, many years. I want to go. And so we went to worship that Sunday, and then after the service, one lady came out. She's in the choir. She came to me after the church, and she says, and when I came through the door and I looked at you and I saw your mother. Well, I guess that's true. My mother had hair just like mine. I got my hair from my mother's side of the family. So I had no problem with that. But I also see some character in my appearance of my father, and we all do when we look. There's no question about it that God has set a pattern for fatherhood. To the Thessalonians, Paul would say, you are witnesses. God also, how we behaved ourselves among you who believe. Paul says we. The we is, of course, if you look through the very first verse, we know who the we is. Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy. And he uses three adverbs to describe their behavior. We were devout, he said. Sonora Dodd, the lady in Spokane, Washington that I mentioned earlier, says of her father, he was a devout and a godly man. He was a devout and he was a godly man. Paul says to Timothy, to the Thessalonians, we behaved ourselves devoutly when we were with you. A godly pattern, a godly character. Luke describes Simeon, who hung around the temple, waiting for the consolation of the Lord, or Israel, if you will, as a just and as a devout man. And what does this all mean? The Greek word is evlavis. Evlavis. Outside the New Testament, it means caution or anxious, being of fear. And in the New Testament, it means being cautious not to overstep the boundary of Judaism. It's sometimes described as pious. And we have developed an attitude of a negative attitude, if you will, about piety. That individual is just a self-righteous, pious hypocrite. I read somewhere once where piety had a deeper meaning of that, and I believe it. And I think about this every time I think about the word of piety. It means that we live our lives in a sense that we are in the presence of God all the time. Now, a man who lives his life like that is going to be sensitive to what God has to say, how to live your life, and what kind of person or what kind of individual to be. Why do we do that? Because we are children of God. And I don't think there's any child who wants to disappoint his parent in any way. Simon is also called just. Dikaios. Just. Throughout the Bible, God is described as being just. Job would cry out, should a mortal man be more just than God? The answer is obviously no. But man should seek to be as just as God. Straight, upright, honorable. There's nothing more devious, more disgusting to me than a devious man who calls himself father. Because he sets an example for nobody. He has no care for his family. He has no care for his children. And it comes down to, in a sense, that he really has no concern or care about himself. Who he is. I think every man in this auditorium this morning thinks pretty highly of himself. Not more than he should. The Bible cautions us about doing that. But he wants to be the best he can, not for himself primarily, but for his family, for his neighborhood, for his community, for his church, and most of all, because he's living with that sense of God's presence in his life. Amen. And that means something. That truly means something. Isaiah calls God just and a Savior. Zechariah could cry out, "Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem! Behold, your King is coming. He is just, and he's having salvation." God has set a pattern for justice and piety and devoutness, if you will, for fathers, and far too many have ignored it. Far too many don't have any use for it, and far too many children have suffered because of it. They behave themselves blamelessly, Paul said. Amemptos. There are two areas I think this could cover. Their personal life and the gospel they preached. We are blameless in our personal life. Not perfect by any means. None of us are perfect. The only perfect man that ever lived was Jesus Christ. We and I know that. As best as we can do. Our righteousness, if you will, as Isaiah says, is just filthy rags. The best we can live our life. But that doesn't mean that we are not responsible for continuing to do it. Striving to be all that God would have us to be. Not just as human beings, but as fathers, as mothers. The family unit was established by God, wasn't established by the court system. We may not like to accept that fact. Many people don't. But we are not at liberty to change it. And though we have, we will ultimately pay the price for it. All of us will. Blameless. Peter preached to his congregation, be diligent to be found by him in peace, without spot and blameless. Work at it. On 10 separate occasions, the Bible describes Jesus as sinless, if you will, or blameless, if you will. Isaiah could declare, they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Blameless, if you will. And there are many children across America today who are not in church, never have been, never will go. They don't know what the Bible teaches. Many of them don't even know who Jesus is. They'll celebrate Easter, they'll celebrate Christmas. But they don't really understand, because their parents haven't taught them. There are children right here in Little River that most likely have never been in church because their parents don't care for the church. Had a friend of mine say to me one time, and this man was a member of the Catholic Church. Now, I'm not knocking Catholics. Don't hear me knock Catholics at all. But he was a member of the Catholic Church. And but he never would go to church. And he would say, why should I go to a place that makes me feel guiltier than I am? Then I said, that's the place you ought to be. That's where you need to be. Fathers who do not want to be blameless. Because wouldn't you hate to stand in eternity as a father, and you saw your child standing there being judged by the great God of the universe, and God says to that child, I never knew you. I cast you into outer darkness, where it's weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. That's what hell is like. You see, the thing about hell is, we need to remember this, and hell is real. I don't care what anybody says. There's a place called heaven, there's a place called hell. There's only two ultimate destinations for you and me as individuals. We're either going to heaven or we're going to hell. That's the message we have for the church outside our doors. Wouldn't you hate to stand there and have your child be condemned to hell, and that child look you in the face and says, you never told me. You never took me to church. Now, none of that applies to none of you. I know that. But many children today never understand the Bible. There are many people, very famous people, people with a lot of money, rich people, celebrities, if you will, who don't know a lot of stuff, a lot of message that the Bible teaches. And that's tragic. That's why they behave like they do. They have no biblical worldview. Fathers must have a biblical worldview if they're going to be the kind of fathers that God would have them to be. Because a biblical worldview says what God teaches, what the Bible has to say, is important in my life. It has some influence on who I am and who I am to be and what I am to be as a father. Well, the reasoning goes something like this. I'm as good as those people down at the church, and they probably are. Many of them give you their last meal on the table. They give you the shirt off your back. They give you a place to bathe. They give you a place to sleep. Being a good moral individual Doesn't do anything except say, that's a good moral individual. Doesn't say a thing about, I am a child of the King. God lives in my heart. I am who I am because of what God has done for me. They're just a bunch of hypocrites down there and do-gooders. Well, you know the old saying, if you're hiding behind something like a hypocrite, as small as a hypocrite, you ain't got much to hide behind. Well, that preacher, all he wants is my money. By the way, I got some news for you. If you really want to know who the richest preachers are, type it in on the internet. Richest preachers in America. You'll find them. You'll be amazed. You might even be appalled at some of them, but you'll be amazed at what you find. Never will forget something my father-in-law used to say. He said, you know what? If somebody elected me to the office of president, I would have to step down from what I'm doing to be the president. And he pastored a simple little Baptist church here and there. Last one was up in South Carolina, upstate a little bit. He went to a church where he was making $20 a week on one occasion. His wife had to go to work in a knitting mill to support the family. But he said, I would have to step down from what I'm doing to become president of the United States. That's how important God was in his life.
Amen.
That's how important God was in his life. Parent who steps into eternity never having made any attempt to have a relationship with God or attempted to lead his children to have a relationship with God is not blameless. Relationship with God is the first and foremost concern that God has for his creatures. I all the time hear scientists say, why are we here? We're trying to discover why we're here. We're trying to discover where we came from. They cannot accept or believe in the simple concept of a divine creator. It's just beyond their imagination. What was it the Bible says? God has used the simple things to confound the wise. You and I know how we got here, and we know why we're here. God wants to have a relationship with us. Fathers, God wants to have a relationship with you. The greatest things that a father can do besides for their children, besides loving their mother, is to live their life in a relationship to God that pleases him. That's what Paul preached. And Jesus set a pattern for us in his own life, in his own ministry. I can do nothing by myself. We think that we have achieved great things. We admire people who have done great things. The great scientists. We've come a long way in technology. There's a movie out about the guy who discovered Apple, Steve Jobs. Maybe you've seen the movie. I've seen it. Not interested in seeing it. But Steve Jobs did a great thing. But I would like to have had an interview with Steve Jobs. Do you believe in God, Steve? Do you believe God has something to say about your life? Do you believe that God may have endowed you with this wisdom to develop all this Apple technology that the world just goes mad about? Einstein said, technology will be the death of a nation and a people. And he was a very smart man. God has endowed us with the wisdom and knowledge and the ability. Do we ever stop to think about that? I came down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. Do you have any concern about the will of God for your life? I do every day. I do every moment I breathe, every moment I live, every step I take. God, What is your ultimate will for my life? What can I do, oh God, to make my life better for you? As the Father has sent or has loved me, so I have loved you. Continue in my love, he would say to the 12. Love is not just some kind of an emotion. Love is that driving force inside of us that says to us, get up and go to work every day. When we were raising our families, where most of us are now retired or retarded, I don't know. Retired. We're tired and retired, right? We've done our thing as families and as fathers. But when we were working, we got up every day because we loved our families. And it was important to make sure that they had a good life. It's a pattern that if one established in one own life, then he's going to stand a pretty good chance of being the kind of father that God would have him to be. Fatherhood. Fatherhood. The Bible is filled with examples for us of fathers. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. On and on and on we can go as we study this idea about fatherhood and what it means to be a father. A coward can't be a father. A weak man can't be a father. A selfish individual cannot be a father. A narcissistic individual cannot be a father. Might bring children into the world, but we're talking something about different than just having children. Fathers, I just leave you with this thought. You may not be the breadwinner anymore, but you're still important in the lives of your children. So you should be there for them and your families and attempt to be all that you can continue to be for them. We're going to stand and sing our hymn of invitation. And maybe you need to come and pray about some issue going on in your life this morning. I don't know. If you do, our altar is open. Maybe there's some decision you might need to make for God. If you need to make that decision, I would encourage you to make it today. As we stand and sing, and as Gary comes to lead us.
Page 307, Just As I Am.
Peace and love. You are welcome here. We're in Father's house. We are not alone. We're in Father's house. Make yourself at home. The blessing table spread. There's plenty to go around. We're all family here. We're in Father's house. If the path you've trod led you far from home, down a road of fear, where you don't belong, here are open arms reaching out to you. His love is shining bright. Now your search is through. We're in Father's house. We are not alone. We're in Father's house. Make yourself at home. The blessing table spread. There's plenty to go around. We're all family here. We're in Father's house. The blessing table spread. There's plenty to go around. We're all family here. We're in Father's house.
Amen. Thank you, Vicki. Now that's a great song, right? Amen. That's a great song. Thank you, dear, very, very much. And thank you, Doris, for that lovely music. A young minister had just begun his parish work, and he went to seek and talk to an older minister about how to do his work, how to carry on his ministry. And so he asked him, says, "What should I preach about?" And the older minister said, "Well, you should preach about God in about 20 minutes. So I'm going to try to preach about 20 minutes, and then I'll let you go. How's that? You are witnesses, and God also, how devoutly and justly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves among you who believe, as you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father does his own children, that you would walk worthy of God, who called you into his own kingdom and glory." Would you bow with me, please, God, this morning? I know that unless you speak, nothing happens. So, Father, I would ask you in a special way that you would fill me up and empty me again, but love me. Take my words and make them thine. Rescue me from me. For this I speak in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Father's Day. I thought about Father's Day, a pattern, God's pattern for Father's Day, and I'm not even going to begin to scratch the surface of this sort of thing. I can't. It's just too big. It's too large. You're right. Probably write books and volumes about fatherhood and parenting and all that sort of thing. And we've had specialists. They've come along and told us how to parent our children. One specialist that we think about very often and very quickly is Dr. Spock. Everybody remembers Dr. Spock. He decided that with all the things that we had done in the past were all wrong, and we should change our approach to parenting. Okay? Well, I thought about terms like, and I will get to Paul, what Paul had to say, but beyond Paul, I thought about terms like accepting responsibility. Accepting responsibility. A number of people in our society, and I may not get to Paul, by the way, but a number of parents, men who become fathers in our society, choose not to accept that responsibility. They prove their manhood by simply having children, bringing children into. You'll remember the story about a few years ago about a man who had something like 27 children with 4 different women. Now he was not. It made national news. He did not in any way attempt to support any of those children, but he was proud of the fact that he could bring into the world, bring into existence 27 lives. That's not what parenthood is about. That's not what fatherhood is about. That is not what God intended for a father to be. Well, we talk about leadership roles, not with an iron rod or a fist of steel, but with love and care and concern. That's what fathers are about, and that's what Paul talks about in his, we exhorted you as a father with his children. The word is comfort, to bring comfort, to bring comfort. Parakaleo in the Greek. We also challenged you, if you will. Challenged you. Paramatheo. And that's just kind of a word that comes into with these other words. And he uses another one we use as witness. It's witness about certain ascertainable facts or witness to the truth. Amatheo or martireo, if you will. But being there, I thought about it. Being there with your family, or for your family, for your children. We have so many absentee fathers today. We have so many absentee individuals who are to be there for their families. I'll think of my father very often. You know, we have folks, children, for example, boys, particularly young boys, who have sports heroes. I remember when I was growing up, baseball was one of the things that I enjoyed mostly, played mostly, listened to mostly. If I was listening to a radio, I remember men gathering around the radio to listen to a baseball game. We didn't have television. And you had to imagine in your mind, as the announcer described the game, what was taking place on the field. And everybody had their favorite baseball hero, football hero. Though I think some have tarnished that label in our time, unfortunately. Well, my father was my hero. I had no other hero in any other place but my father. I wanted to be like my father. My father was a coal miner. He worked in the coal mines for over 30 years. He went in when he was 17 years of age. Now, as you know, coal mining is a very dangerous occupation. It's dangerous in a lot of ways. Mines explode, men get killed. And sometimes there are many men who get killed. In the history of coal mining in West Virginia, at one time, over 300 men were killed at one time. And the church set aside a day to honor those men, which is a part of the history of Father's Day. But you get a disease called black lung. pneumococcus is the technical term. My father had it, 3rd stage. And it's like little black particles of coal dust getting into your lung tissue. And the body, in order to protect itself, seals those little dust particles off. And that tissue becomes scar tissue. It loses its elasticity. And when it happens enough, you lose lung capacity, and it becomes very difficult to breathe. It winds up killing you. My father was my hero because he was a leader. He led his family. He was there for his family. He worked at night most of the time. He was not at home very much. He worked 3-11 shift. Sometimes we hoped he would not have any problems getting home. We hoped every day that he would come back home. And so I didn't get to grow up around him very often, but often enough to know that he was in charge. When he said, do, you did. When he said, we're going to church, we knew we were going to church. I remember the time that he said, we are going to establish a family circus in our circle, in our home. We're going to have Bible reading every night, and we're going to have prayer every night before we go to bed. And we did. He established it, not my mother. And when he wasn't around to do it, she did it. That's what being a father is all about, I think. At least a good portion of it. He was an example in his work life, in his religious life, and in his family life. He was faithful. He was faithful. Fathers are to be faithful individuals. They're to be faithful to their family. They're not to be selfish individuals. Not to think solely of themselves and only of themselves. When this individual had 27 children by 4 different women, he had nobody in mind but himself. Egocentric, narcissistic, and an abomination as far as I'm concerned as a parent. My father was faithful. My family, my brothers, my sister could count on him being there. And it was always a comfort to us to know that he would be there for us. And that's part of being a father, as you well know. And many of you can say the same things about your fathers. He was a provider. He went to work every day. He had a great work ethic, and he passed that work ethic along to his family, to each of us. And so these are things that I didn't even get to talk about or didn't even cover. He set a pattern, a biblical pattern for us to follow. And he was always wanted his children, as your fathers did, to be better and do better than he did. One of the things that he was determined to do, I never will forget this, he was determined that none of his children, none of his sons, would ever work in a coal mine. I remember when my brother was in like a junior in high school, and he failed an English class, so in his senior year he had to take 2 English classes. And I think, as I understand it now, I didn't understand it then, but some of my family told me, well, he did it on purpose because he wanted to graduate with his girlfriend, a lady he later married. But I never will forget my father saying to him, son, you will graduate from high school if you've got a beard down to your knees. He was that determined that his children would get an education. And some of the most cherished words in our English language is terms like mother, like father. Now my mother was always with her children.